The metal of the blueprint tube was cold and biting into my palm, but it was the only thing I owned that still existed. 10 minutes ago, I watched my own face on every monitor in the office under the word deceased. My bank accounts are gone. My car won't start. Even the facial recognition cameras in this lobby are flagging me as a corpse. I can see the security guards, David and Robert, reaching for their belts. They aren't coming to escort me out. They're coming to finish what the computer started. I have exactly 38 minutes to reach City Hall and prove I have a pulse before the firm's kill switch deletes the last trace of my legal identity forever. But here's the part that's rotting my brain. The digital death certificate wasn't a glitch. It was signed by my family doctor. The man who delivered my children wants me buried. Let me take you back to the moment the elevator stopped and my life became a ghost story. The pixelated text on the monitors shimmered, a digital tombstone carved in Helvetica. Arthur Miller's lungs constricted as his own portrait stared back, positioned above a date of death listed as today. He lunged for the mouse, but the cursor vanished into the white void of the screen. A crimson padlock icon snapped into existence, swallowing his files, his emails, and 20 years of billable hours. The hum of the office air conditioning, a sound he usually found meditative, suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge, a mechanical mourning for a man still drawing breath. He didn't wait for a secondary confirmation. He bolted. His leather soles skidded on the polished marble of the Sterling and Vance lobby, his body pivoting toward the emergency exit with a frantic, uncoordinated grace. He slammed his shoulder against the heavy steel door, the impact vibrating through his marrow. Inside the stairwell, the air changed instantly, tasting of stale concrete and the chemical tang of industrial floor wax. As he spiraled down the concrete flights, his smartphone vibrated against his thigh, a frantic, staccato rhythm of notifications. He pulled it out. The screen swiped gray, factory resetting itself into a blank slate. His professional existence, his contacts, his very history, evaporated with every floor he descended. He was a ghost in a white shirt, haunted by the sudden vacuum of his own life. The basement level was a labyrinth of exposed pipes and humming machinery. Arthur's breath came in ragged hitches, the sound echoing off the cinder-block walls. He needed the server room. He needed to find the physical heart of the network and shove his thumb against the tide of deletion. But the elevators were frozen, and the digital locks on the heavy security doors had already turned a defiant, unblinking red. He was trapped in the guts of the building he had helped design, a master of space now imprisoned by his own geometry. A shadow detached itself from the gloom near the maintenance lockers. Arthur froze, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Arthur? The voice was small, trembling with a guilt that seemed to vibrate in the humid air. Sarah Johnson stepped into the amber glow of a flickering maintenance bulb. She smelled of rain and cheap coffee, her wide eyes darting to the security cameras nesting in the corners of the ceiling. Without a word, she reached into the pocket of her oversized cardigan and pressed a plastic rectangle into his palm. The magnetic strip bit into his skin, a sharp, physical reminder of the stakes. "Keep it close," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal she was committing. The security feed loops every 90 seconds. If you miss the window, you don't exist. They're wiping everything, Arthur. Not just the project files, they're erasing you. Arthur gripped the key card, the edges cold and unforgiving. He opened his mouth to ask her why she was risking her life for a man who barely knew her name. But Sarah shoved him toward the service alley. "I'm sorry," she whispered. already pulling out her phone to log the apology in her digital ledger. "I'm so sorry for the mess." The heavy door groaned open, and the Chicago heat surged in, smelling of asphalt and exhaust, welcoming a ghost into the midday sun. He hit the sidewalk with the momentum of a falling body. The transition from the chilled, sterile interior of the firm to the sweltering chaos of the street was a physical blow. He clutched the heavy cardboard blueprint tube to his chest. The last tangible evidence of his career, the physical ink and paper that no algorithm could delete. To his left, the revolving doors of the main lobby hissed open. David Miller and Robert Thompson surged out. David, the older guard, had his handwritten grocery list tucked into his belt, his face set in a mask of weary duty. Robert, younger and jittery, was already looking at the sky, his lips moving as he counted the windows of the skyscraper. "Mr. Miller, stop!" David's voice boomed over the roar of a passing bus. Arthur didn't stop. He couldn't. He pivoted, his mind racing through the spatial dimensions of the plaza. He saw the way they were flanking him, a pincer movement designed to pin him against the fountain. When Robert reached for his heavy black nightstick, Arthur didn't cower. He swung the blueprint tube like a club, the reinforced cardboard connecting with the guard's forearm with a dull thud. 13, 14, 15, Robert muttered, his eyes wide and unfocused even as he winced from the blow. Arthur lunged toward a massive concrete planter overflowing with petunias. With a guttural roar, he shoved the heavy weight with all the strength of a man, fighting for his soul. The planter ground against the pavement, a screech of stone on stone that set his teeth on edge, effectively blocking the path of the charging guards. He scrambled over a low marble wall, his fingers scraping against the grit, and vanished into the thick, anonymous tide of the midday crowd. He ran until his lungs burned, ducking behind a newsstand to catch his breath. He pulled the key card from his pocket, expecting to see his own name or perhaps a generic guest pass. Instead, the bold black letters read, "James Sterling, Jr., Executive Access." A cold shiver that had nothing to do with the heat raced down his spine. Sarah hadn't just given him a way back in. She had given him the keys to the kingdom. But as he looked at the card, his phone, now a brick of glass and plastic, began to glow with a final, haunting message. It wasn't a text. It was a push notification from a local news app, a headline that made the world tilt on its axis. Tragic loss. Lead architect Arthur Miller found dead in apparent suicide. The logic of the move was brilliant in its cruelty. By declaring him dead, Thomas Sterling hadn't just fired him. He had removed his standing in the eyes of the law. A dead man cannot sue. A dead man cannot claim intellectual property. A dead man has no rights to his own bank accounts. Arthur looked at his hands, expecting to see them fading into transparency. He was alive. He could feel the grit under his fingernails and the heat on his neck. But to the world of data and light, he was a memory. He needed to move. He needed to get to City Hall before the tender meeting, where the Sterling family would finalize the multi-billion-dollar contract using his stolen designs. He stepped to the curb and whistled for a yellow cab. The car pulled over, the engine idling with a rhythmic, mechanical growl. "City Hall, fast," Arthur said, sliding into the back seat. The upholstery smelled of old cigarettes and lemon-scented air freshener. The driver, a man with a thick neck and a weary expression, tapped the meter. "Got a card, pal? Machine's acting up, need to pre-authorize." Arthur swiped his personal visa. A sharp, discordant beep echoed in the small space. Declined. He tried his MasterCard. Declined. He tried the corporate card. The screen on the payment terminal flashed a message that made the driver's eyes narrow in the rearview mirror. Account closed. report to issuing bank." "Out," the driver said, his voice dropping an octave. "Look, I have cash at home. I said out. I don't drive ghosts for free." The driver leaned over and shoved the door open. Arthur stumbled out onto the hot asphalt, the sound of the cab's tires screeching away sounding like a derisive laugh. He was stranded. The walk to City Hall was 2 miles through the most heavily surveilled corridor in the Midwest. He began to walk, keeping his head down, but the city itself seemed to be turning against him. As he crossed the intersection at Millennium Plaza, a massive digital billboard, usually reserved for sparkling soda ads, flickered. His own face, black and white and framed by a somber border, stared down at the thousands of commuters. Suddenly, the chirp of a police siren cut through the ambient roar of traffic. A cruiser idling at the red light suddenly jerked forward, its roof lights erupting in a frantic dance of red and blue. Arthur didn't wait to see if they were looking for him. He knew the system. The facial recognition cameras mounted on the traffic poles had pinged his location, triggering a deceased person alert. To the officers in that car, he wasn't a citizen. He was a walking anomaly, a glitch that needed to be corrected. He dived into a narrow alleyway, the walls of damp brick closing in around him. The smell of rotting cabbage and wet cardboard rose to meet him. Behind him, he heard the heavy thunk of car doors closing and the rapid-fire clicking of heels on pavement. But it wasn't the police who entered the alley first. A black SUV, its windows tinted to a fathomless obsidian, rolled silently to the mouth of the alley. It didn't have a license plate. It sat there, a predatory beast blocking the light, its engine purring with a low-frequency vibration that Arthur could feel in his molars. He backed away, his heels clicking against the greasy cobblestones. He reached the end of the alley, a dead end blocked by a towering stack of industrial trash bins and a rusted fire escape that started 10 feet above his head. "Arthur Miller," a voice called out. It was a flat Midwestern accent, devoid of emotion. A man stepped out from behind the bins. This was Michael Davis. He was nondescript, wearing a gray windbreaker that blended into the shadows, but his hands were busy, picking at his cuticles until they bled. He didn't carry a badge, and he didn't carry a gun. He wore a pair of heavy brass knuckles that caught the sliver of sunlight filtering down from above. "You're supposed to be in a box, Arthur," Davis said, stepping forward. He didn't make a left turn. He circled to the right, his movements dictated by a superstition Arthur didn't yet understand. Thomas doesn't like loose ends. They're messy. They ruin the lines of the building. Davis lunged. The first punch whistled past Arthur's ear, the wind of it cold against his skin. Arthur scrambled back, his hands searching for a weapon, a shield, anything. His fingers closed around the rim of a heavy galvanized steel trash can lid. He yanked it upward just as Davis swung again. The metal shrieked as the brass knuckles connected. The vibration traveled up Arthur's arms, numbing his elbows, but the lid held. He shoved forward, using the weight of the steel to catch Davis in the chest. The assassin stumbled, his breath escaping in a sharp wheeze, but he recovered instantly. He pulled a thin, serrated blade from his sleeve. "You're making this difficult," Davis muttered, his eyes tracking Arthur's throat. Arthur's gaze darted around the confined space. High above, a thick iron pipe ran along the brickwork, a small plume of white vapor hissing from a corroded joint. It was a high-pressure steam line for the building's heating system. As Davis lunged with the knife, Arthur didn't pull back. He dropped to his knees, grabbed a discarded length of heavy rebar from the trash, and swung upward with every ounce of desperation he possessed. He didn't hit Davis. He hit the pipe. The iron groaned and then screamed as it sheared open. A violent, blinding cloud of scalding steam erupted into the alley, a white wall of heat that smelled of mineral deposits and ancient rust. Davis shrieked, clutching his face as the vapor cooked the air around him. Arthur didn't stay to watch. He scrambled through a low, broken basement window of the adjacent building, the jagged glass tearing at his white shirt, and tumbled into the cool, dark silence of a subterranean storage room. He emerged minutes later into the hushed, dust-choked sanctuary of the Chicago Public Library. The transition was jarring. From the violent heat of the alley to the cathedral-like silence of the stacks. He moved through the rows of books, his breath coming in shallow gasps until he found a row of guest terminals in the back of the reference section. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He didn't need a password for the public records. He searched for his own name, his heart sinking as he saw the official filing. Certificate of death. State of Illinois. Cause, asphyxiation. Certified by Dr. Stephen Baker. Arthur stared at the name. Stephen Baker wasn't just a doctor. He was the man who had delivered Arthur's nieces, the man Arthur had trusted with his own medical history for 15 years. The betrayal felt more physical than the punch from Davis. It was a systemic infection. The firm hadn't just hacked his computer, they had bought his life. He pulled up the metadata for the filing, his eyes scanning the digital signatures. The document hadn't been uploaded from the doctor's office. It had been routed through a secondary server located at Sterling and Vance. They had used Baker's credentials to sign the warrant for his erasure. "I'm still here," Arthur whispered, his voice a ghost's rasp in the silent library. He looked at the blueprint tube resting on the desk. It was the only thing that hadn't been digitized, the only thing they couldn't turn off with a keystroke. Subverted, Arthur knew he couldn't just walk into City Hall through the front door. He needed an edge. He needed someone inside who knew the bureaucracy better than he knew the blueprints. He thought of Jennifer Reed. Jennifer was a senior clerk in the City Hall annex, a woman who had spent 30 years navigating the labyrinth of deeds, titles, and permits. He had worked with her on a dozen projects. She was meticulous, honest, and possessed a memory like a steel trap. If anyone could help him navigate the legal death he was trapped in, it was her. He found her in the basement archives, a space that smelled of old paper and the rhythmic humming of happy birthday she used to time her filing. When she saw him, she didn't scream. She didn't call security. She simply pushed her oversized glasses up her nose and looked at his torn, soot-stained shirt. "Arthur," she said, her voice a soft, comforting trill. "I heard the news. I was just about to file the memorial permit for your family. Jennifer, I'm not dead," he said, stepping into the light. "Look at me. I'm standing right here. It's a fraud. Sterling is trying to bypass the tender committee by removing the lead architect. If I'm dead, the intellectual property reverts to the firm immediately." Jennifer's eyes softened. She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers warm and solid. "I believe you, Arthur. I saw the filing this morning. It felt rushed, too clean. Come with me. There's a service elevator that bypasses the main security checkpoints. It leads directly to the executive wing. If you can get into that boardroom and show them the physical plans, the committee will have to listen." Arthur felt a surge of genuine hope. This was the smart play. Avoid the police at the front door, use an internal ally, and strike at the heart of the meeting. Jennifer led him through a series of narrow, dimly lit corridors, her keys jingling rhythmically. She swiped her high-level badge at the service lift, and the doors slid open with a welcoming chime. "Go," she said, squeezing his hand. Floor 4. The meeting started 10 minutes ago. I'll stay here and try to pull the original deed records to back you up. Arthur stepped into the elevator, his shoulders dropping for the first time in hours. He had a path. He had an ally. The crisis was manageable. The doors closed, and the lift began its smooth, silent ascent. The elevator stopped at the 3rd floor. The doors opened, but it wasn't the boardroom. It was a windowless security staging area. Standing there, flanked by 4 uniformed officers, was Thomas Sterling. He was performing his triple wash at a small basin in the corner, the sound of splashing water the only noise in the room. Arthur lunged for the close door button, but the lift had been remotely frozen. Jennifer Reed stepped out from behind the officers. She wasn't humming Happy Birthday anymore. She was holding a thick manila folder, the same one Arthur had seen her holding in the basement. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she said, her voice devoid of its previous warmth. "But I've worked in this building for 30 years. Do you know how many honest men I've seen crushed by the Sterlings? I have a pension to think about. I have a home I can't afford to lose." Thomas Sterling dried his hands with a linen towel, his eyes as cold as a winter lake. "Thank you, Jennifer. Your loyalty to the city's stability is noted." He turned his gaze to Arthur. "You see, Arthur, you always over-engineered your structures. You forgot that a building is only as strong as the people inside it. And people, unlike steel, have a price." Jennifer didn't look at Arthur as the guards grabbed him. She simply turned and walked back toward the archives, her heels clicking a steady, traitorous rhythm. The secret path hadn't been an escape. It had been a funnel, delivering him directly into the hands of the man who had already buried him. Arthur was now trapped in the heart of the fortress, with no allies and no way out. The guards didn't take him to a cell. They dragged him toward the mahogany hallway that led to the boardroom. But as they rounded the corner, a massive figure stepped out, blocking the path like a fallen oak. James Sterling Jr. stood there, his heavy shoulders hunched, his knuckles cracking with the sound of small gunshots. He looked at the guards and then at Arthur. "You're going to stop running now?" James asked, his voice rising at the end in that characteristic, uncertain query. The guards hesitated, looking to Thomas for direction. Thomas nodded once, a sharp, predatory movement. "James will handle the trespasser. We have a meeting to conclude." The elder Sterling disappeared into the boardroom, the heavy oak doors closing with a final, resonant thud. James stepped forward, his shadow swallowing Arthur. He didn't use a weapon. He used his weight, slamming Arthur against the dark wood paneling of the hallway. The air left Arthur's lungs in a violent rush. He felt the cold, hard surface of the wall against his spine and the crushing pressure of James's forearm against his throat. "This is where it ends for you?" James asked, his face inches from Arthur's. Arthur struggled, his fingers clawing at the thick, muscular arm. He could see the boardroom doors just 20 feet away. Beyond those doors was the truth. Between him and that truth was 300 pounds of directed violence. He reached down, his fingers finding the nylon strap of his blueprint tube. It was a long, adjustable strap, reinforced with a steel wire to prevent theft. As James shifted his weight to deliver a finishing blow, Arthur looped the strap around James's ankle and yanked with every ounce of leverage he could find. It was a simple structural failure. James, caught off balance, flailed for a handhold. His massive fist caught the edge of a glass trophy case, the reinforced panes shattering with a sound like 1,000 breaking bells. He tumbled backward, his head connecting with the marble floor with a sickening crack. Arthur didn't wait to see if he was breathing. He scrambled to his feet, his ribs screaming in protest, and threw his weight against the boardroom doors. At the head of the table, Thomas Sterling. At the head of the table, Thomas Sterling stood with a laser pointer, gesturing toward a digital projection of Arthur's skyscraper. The room went silent as Arthur stumbled in, bleeding, his white shirt gray with soot, clutching a battered cardboard tube. "Members of the committee," Thomas said, his voice smooth and untroubled. He didn't even look surprised. "I apologize for the intrusion. This is the individual I mentioned earlier. A tragic case. He's the twin brother of our late lead architect, Arthur Miller. He's been unstable since the news of the suicide broke." "I'm not his brother," Arthur shouted, his voice cracking. He lunged for the table, fumbling with the cap of the blueprint tube. "I am Arthur Miller. This man is a fraud. He's trying to steal the project." Thomas sighed, a long, theatrical sound that seemed to drain the oxygen from the room. He tapped a key on his remote. The massive monitors on the wall flickered. It was a live feed from the Grace Memorial Funeral Home. A woman Arthur didn't recognize, a professional actress, he realized with a jolt of horror, was draped over a closed mahogany casket. She was sobbing, her face a mask of performative grief. "As you can see," Thomas said quietly, "the family is already in the process of saying goodbye. This man's delusions are a symptom of his grief. It's quite common in cases of sudden trauma." The committee members looked at Arthur with a mixture of pity and revulsion. To them, he wasn't a man with a grievance. He was a ghost haunting his own funeral, a messy, organic error in a clean, corporate transaction. "Security," the mayor whispered, waving a hand. The guards surged forward. As they tackled Arthur to the ground, pinning his face against the cold, expensive carpet, Thomas Sterling walked over to the table. He picked up the blueprint tube that had fallen from Arthur's grasp. With a slow, deliberate motion, Thomas walked to the corner of the room where a high-capacity industrial shredder sat. He fed the physical blueprints, the years of work, the hand-drawn calculations, the soul of the building, into the machine. The sound was horrific. A rhythmic, mechanical grinding that chewed through the heavy paper, turning the evidence of Arthur's life into a pile of white confetti. "The project is secure," Thomas said, looking down at Arthur. "The dead don't build, Arthur. They just rot." The world went black as a heavy hand pressed Arthur's head into the floor. He woke up in the back of a police cruiser. The interior was a cage of hard plastic and steel mesh. His hands were cuffed behind his back, the metal biting into his wrists with every jolt of the car. He stared at his bruised, shaking hands, the silence of the vehicle a heavy weight on his chest. He had lost. The digital record said he was dead. The physical record had been turned to dust. He looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, the very buildings he had loved now looking like the teeth of a giant trap. But as he sat there, he felt a small, hard object in his pocket. He shifted his weight, his fingers brushing against the cold steel of his architectural scribe, a tool for etching precise lines into stone and metal. He had kept it in his pocket out of habit, a piece of his old life that hadn't been confiscated. The car hit a bump, and the officer in the front seat swore. Arthur looked at the man's reflection in the rearview mirror. It was the same officer who had been standing next to Thomas Sterling in the security room. He wasn't going to a precinct. He was being taken somewhere quiet, somewhere final. "You know," Arthur said, his voice calm, "the subway expansion is boring right under this street. They're using a 3-ton thermal drill. If the frequency isn't calibrated to the bedrock, it creates a seismic resonance." "Shut up," the officer growled. In about 10 seconds, Arthur continued, his eyes fixed on the vibration of the water in a bottle in the center console. The resonance is going to hit the peak of the curve. The ground isn't going to shake. It's going to liquefy. The vibration started as a low-frequency hum that rattled Arthur's teeth. Then, the world exploded. A massive tremor, triggered by the heavy machinery 3 stories below, buckled the asphalt. The police cruiser lurched as the street itself seemed to turn into a river of gray stone. The officer screamed, slamming on the brakes, but the car slid sideways, crashing into a heavy construction barrier. In the chaos of the impact, Arthur used the scribe. He didn't pick the locks. He didn't have the time. He jammed the steel point into the internal mechanism of the cuffs, using the leverage of the car's jolt to shear the pin. The cuffs snapped open. He kicked the door open and tumbled out into the dust and the screaming sirens. He didn't run away. He ran back. He didn't go to the boardroom. He went to the lobby, where a dozen news crews were waiting for the post-meeting press conference. He saw Jennifer Reed standing near the fountain, her face pale as she watched the chaos. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He walked up to her and pressed a small, silver USB drive into her hand, the one he had swiped from James Sterling's pocket during their struggle. "This has the kill switch code," Arthur whispered. "It shows exactly how they wiped the servers. Give it to the woman in the blue suit. She's with the Tribune." Jennifer looked at the drive, and then at Arthur. For a moment, the humming of "Happy Birthday" returned to her lips, a soft, mournful tune. She nodded once, a silent apology that finally felt real. Arthur walked out of the building and into the park across the street. He sat on a dry, rotted bench, the wood crumbling under his weight. He watched as the black SUVs began to pull up to the curb of Sterling and Vance. Not the firm's cars, but the FBI's. He saw Thomas Sterling being led out in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his hands reaching for a bottle of soap he no longer possessed. Arthur felt nothing. No triumph, no anger. Just a profound, hollow sense of space. He was a man without a digital footprint, a ghost who had haunted his way back into the light. Jennifer Reed walked across the grass and sat down next to him. She handed him a paper cup of coffee. It was hot, bitter, and real. "The story's breaking," she said. "The whole committee is being subpoenaed. They're calling it the digital execution scandal. You're famous, Arthur." Arthur looked at his hands. They were covered in soot, blood, and the dust of his own blueprints. He pulled the architectural scribe from his pocket, the tool that had built his life and then saved it. He stood up and walked to the nearest trash bin. He dropped the scribe inside, the metal clinking against a discarded soda can. "I'm not an architect anymore, Jennifer," he said, looking at the skyline. "I think I'd rather just be a man." He walked away into the city, a man with no name, no files, and no past, finally free to build something that wouldn't show up on a screen.